بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. I wanted to talk today about reviving our traditional Sunni Islam and our traditional Sunni methodology among us. But I want to talk about that in a way that kind of relates to us. It's something we have to figure out. I was listening to the youth yesterday on the 3453 show. And as I was listening to them, it was a very good show, by the way. May Allah reward them and increase them. And I would pray that we support them and listen to them every Sunday at 4:30. It is important that we support them in their efforts and encourage more to get involved. We have to, 4 p.m. So it's 4 p.m. All right. Yeah. So it's every Sunday at 4 p.m. And I think it's important when you make noble intentions, how Allah facilitate, because our elders, they made they had an intention to do something, and it started out a little different from how they intended, but they kept the noble intention, and Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala opened the door from them to get closer to what they wanted to see happen. So may Allah make them successful. But anyway, what I noticed in listening to them is that we actually live in two different worlds in terms of reality and on the ground experience. And I was thinking about this morning when I woke up. The things that they are confronted with and concerned with are totally different from what most of us as adults are concerned with and are faced with. So we want a specific thing for our children and for our youth and for our future. But the world they live in doesn't reflect that thing we want. And it doesn't entail that what we want to give them is not beneficial But we have to figure out a way to get it to them in a way that speaks to their reality. In order to do that, we definitely have to listen to them to see what their reality is. But one thing, no matter what our realities are, Islam is suitable for every time and place. Islam is suitable for every time and place. Our job is to find the suitability for the deen in the lives of the people we're trying to reach. It's extremely important. So what becomes most important in that effort is to first think about and reflect upon what is necessary in Islam for everyone. What does everyone need? And now when I say what everyone need is the obligatory aspects of the deen. There is no way to get around that. But when you say they need the obligatory aspects of the deen, how much of it do they need, right? They need what will fulfill the obligation at minimum. And then they want to perfect the obligation. So they want to learn more to make it even stronger. But they need the essential aspects. And from listening to them, I realize that our traditional way of learning the methodology of Ahl Sunnah is suitable for exactly what they need. In other words, if you study the traditional books of Islam in the Sunni methodology, the concern is to make sure people know their obligations. So if you study a book, it's going to be organized in a way that the obligations are first, even before the recommended matters or the sunnah matters, the obligations. And knowing the conditions for them, the integrals for them, and how to avoid the invalidators. Because at that bare minimum, the person is not sinful. And in our time, I think one of the things we need to worry about is how to keep us from being sinful. So there is a line, this is in fact like the first line after the introduction in the book Sunnah at-Tawfiq by Habib Abdullah bin Hussein bin Tahir. He said, يجب على كافة المكلفين الدخول في الدين الإسلام والثبوت فيه على الدوام والتزام ما لزم عليه من الأحكام. That's a very important line. And he starts his book with that line, that it is an obligation on every morally responsible individual, every mukallaf. The mukallaf is an important term in Islam, because at the age of at-taklif, when someone becomes morally responsible, and what did that mean? What does that mean in reality? They're going to be rewarded for the good deeds they commit, and they deserve to be punished for the sins they commit. That's at the age of at-taklif. So the mukallaf, that morally responsible individual, needs certain things. Among them, if they were a non-Muslim, they need to embrace the religion of Islam. They need to become a Muslim. And that's why a da'wah is important, because you cannot fulfill you cannot fulfill any of the obligations and be rewarded with that without Islam, because Islam is a condition for the acceptance of one's good deeds. So the first thing you have to do is get that person to Islam. And that way is by conveying the call of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So all of us have a function in that, right? We have to give a da'wah at minimum to let the people become morally responsible, that they heard the call of Islam, which is the testification of faith, in a language they understand. Notice something, and I want you to pay attention to this. The person only becomes morally responsible when they hear the call of Islam in a language that they understand. Let's stop there. The person, after being sane, after being pubescent, have all their faculties, right, of hearing and sight, because they have to hear or they have to see. So they need their faculties, right? If the person is deaf, they can't hear the call and they can't see you moving your lips, right? So after having all that, they need to receive the testification of faith in a language they understand. So if the person doesn't speak Arabic and you tell them the Shahada in Arabic and they don't understand, they're not accountable. There's a lesson in that if we pay attention. Our religion is very interesting. In other words, speak to the people in a language they understand if you want to produce a result from them. If you want them to understand, you have to speak to them in a language they understand. How often are we speaking to our youth or to others in a language they don't understand? Now, one is a literal sense, and the other, that a second part I mentioned, is a figurative sense. The literal sense is you have to convey it. So if they don't speak Arabic, you got to say it in the language they speak. The meaning of what is conveyed in Arabic, that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? You have to do that. Well, on the figurative side of it, you got to speak to people within their context, or they're not going to benefit. They're not going to understand you. And a lot of times, people may not be rejecting Islam they may be rejecting the way we're conveying Islam. And we should take a look into that. Like, are they rejecting Islam itself, or they're rejecting the way we are conveying the deen to them? Because we're conveying it in a language that they don't understand. So I remember I was talking to my daughter. She's in college, in the university. And on the university, I went there. There's only a handful of Muslims. And practicing Muslims, forget that. Right? Man, less than a handful. Right? So I was talking to the youth and talking to them. And she told me that they're into crystals, right? Everybody's into crystals, going to the crystal store. And I realized something. I don't even know what a crystal is. I had no idea what she was talking about. I mean, I know what crystals are, but I had no idea that that's a whole religious culture. They don't call it a religion, but it is their way of life. And it's a part of what they call spirituality. So they are looking for uh, spirituality, but because we haven't presented at tasawwuf as a option for our youth to find that need in the soul, because a lot of them are depressed and miserable, and so they're looking for some spiritual and emotional upliftment, which is in the deen, but we left that aspect out. So now they're looking into crystals as an alternative to that, right? So we had a long talk about it, about cause and effect and traces and creation and God, right? It was an interesting discussion. But here's the thing. All those matters are discussed in our creed as Muslims. Because what is happening with these crystals? They're using means to try to get something, when the real cause of that outcome you're looking for is not through that means. So there needs to be a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the causer of harm and benefit. He is the one who causes benefit, and he is the one who creates harm. No one else. Which is a creed issue, right? It's an issue of the creed. So while we're talking about, for instance, in my reality, for my life, one of the biggest reality is anthropomorphism, tajsim and tashbih. That's what I'm dealing with. I'm surrounded by people who liken Allah to his creation. For the people I deal with, right? But who they're around are people who take causes as or means as creating harm and benefit, which is kufr. So just as this is blasphemous over here, we're dealing with blasphemy together, but this is a whole nother form of blasphemy, right? So it still contradicts the correct creed. And it's obligatory for a person as a Muslim to know that no one creates anything except Allah, not even the means, right? Hal min khaliqin ghayrullah, there is no creator other than Allah, right? But that's part of the creed. So someone may say, Aqeedah is not important. Why not? Look at your children. They're going to be thinking that means create stuff, which is kufr. It takes them right out of Islam to believe that. And in reality, those means is a big form of idol worship. What about when you drop your crystal and it breaks? What about when someone steals your crystal? You know, in the college, they steal. Our children are receiving in a delusionary way gods other than Allah. Wal-iyadhu billah. That's some serious stuff. Forget all the other evil things for right now. Voodoo, witchcraft. We're talking about shirk, the highest form of kufr. Not imaginary. This person believes that this crystal is going to create benefit. This is blasphemy. So an essential part of the creed, needs to be taught well to our children. So when they become Muslim, or they were raised as Muslim, you have to teach them what? The meanings of the testification of faith. And they understanding that means what? And then they must remain steadfast on it. So what is happening is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being moved out the whole equation. Not a bad concept of God, no God at all. Deep, no God at all. I remember years ago, I was teaching in the university. I was on tour. Outside, not as a professor, as a teacher of religion, going in and doing classes, doing religious classes, sometimes it was history, different kinds of events they would be doing in the universities. And I remember atheism was a big issue. Atheism was a big issue. They were struggling with faith altogether, like belief, the essence of faith, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now I see the trend from talking to them of using means as a God. So take God out and replace it with means. with causes. Asbab. And we should watch this because we're in a society that is really moving to some evil stuff. Some of our youth are also faced with the issue of sexuality and gender. I don't know if you noticed that now every single thing must be sensitive and include the destruction of traditional gender roles. Be very careful what your children watch. Some stuff you just don't notice. You may not. And also be careful what you watch because it also has its way of normalizing sin in your heart. I, I would suggest for us to start paying attention to what's going on around us for the purpose of a da'wah, not for the purpose of watching sin. But sometimes you need to see it so you know what's happening around you. Right? While we act like we just too pious and we don't pay attention, and they're pushing this agenda all over. There is there is the movie called The Eternals. It's one of those Marvel comic movies. And they made a scene in that movie, one scene, of a homosexual couple. And it was, if I remember correctly, I think only one black guy in the role, one black person, if I remember correctly. Uh, and they made him a homosexual. This is some crap, right? Out of the whole movie, they had to put that in, and they didn't put it in immediately, and they made the black guy a homosexual. I'm like, what the heck is that? Right? And the other was like an Arab dude. So there was the black and the Arab guy, they made them gay. You hear what I said? They made the black and the Arab guy gay. Not the white man, black guy got to be gay. You don't think this stuff by design? Right? Like, you don't see yourself in the movie, and then when you do see yourself, you gay. Think about that. I was like, this is some deep stuff. So Arab represent maybe the Muslim guy can see himself in there. And you gay too. Your hero's gay. Subhanallah. This is what our children are faced with. This is what we are faced with too, because we live in the world. So I think we need to be really conscious of what's going on around us. Because every time there is a new culture that you're going to be faced with, and you have to deal with what is at the time. That's your job. That's your call of da'wah. Whatever is the time, you have to face it. You have to face it. And I think we should pay attention that we may be losing our children and our youth to this society and all of it, all the things that exist, because we're ignoring reality with our own religiosity. I want you to keep that in mind. It may be due to the fact that we're ignoring reality due to our self-proclaimed religiosity. We need to be careful. I don't know how we exactly navigate that, but I know we need to figure it out. You can't be too religious that you don't pay attention. And every time calls for different measures. Every time and situation calls for different measures. Sometimes you just got to be able to connect the dots, right? From thing to thing. I'm reading this book, right? Right? It's called Kitab Taqyid al-Ilm by Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, right? And what this book is about books and recording knowledge, writing down knowledge. And the way this book starts, this book was written in the 5th century. We talked about Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi yesterday. I like his works. But what he does in this book, he talks about a time when they used to never write nothing down, everything was memorization. Then a time where writing down became important. And then at the end, he talks about the benefit of books and its importance. And as I'm reading this book, so he talked about from the time of the Prophet, the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, those after them, talking about the prohibition of writing down the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where their concern was only memorize. And if someone would write down, they would erase it and say, memorize it, don't write it down. And there are reasons, but you'll notice that at one point, this was the attitude. Then when the circumstance changed, there was another type of attitude, right? And now we live in another time, there should be another attitude. I'll give you an example. My inclination from the way I learn, I would never do this. I'm talking about Facebook and YouTube and all this stuff. I wouldn't do it. But it was younger people, younger than me, who said, hey, dinosaur. Something could be real rude. Hey, dinosaur, ain't nobody coming to the masjid. You better get online. Because my attitude is if you don't come to the masjid, sit in the circles of knowledge, you don't want to learn. That was my dinosaur thinking, figurative speech. But in reality, they were right. So COVID happened and it forced me to go online. They had been pushing me for years, right? But then I watched the benefit from being online, that we could share and we could benefit and we could learn and we could spread. And people are learning stuff that they may have never heard had we not did this, right? People are learning things that they would have never, ever heard if we weren't online. Because they wouldn't have come to Atlantic City to Masjid Muhammad or another masjid that may, or they wouldn't even know what to look for. They would have no idea. So you have to figure out each time what is necessary for the time. They say a Sufi, sahibul waqt. The Sufi is the person of their time, right? They know what's going on at the time and they act accordingly. So let's say this. The Sufi is maybe that's the best way for me to translate it where it makes sense. The Sufi is the person of the moment. A Sufi, sahibul waqt. The Sufi is the person of the moment. He knows what he needs to do in the moment. At every moment, he looks for the best thing to do in terms of worshiping Allah. And the moment is not always the same. You don't do the same thing every moment. He's flexible. She's flexible. What is the most beneficial thing at this moment? What is the obligation at this moment? What all I need to do at this moment? If it's time to pay zakat, I don't spend my time praying. If it's time to fast, I don't spend my time doing something else. Whatever's the time. If it's time to give a da'wah, I'm going to give a da'wah. If it's time to sleep, I'm going to sleep. That's very important. It's extremely important that we understand that. So for all of us, let's discover in our own life what we need to be doing and what is important in our sphere, in our environment, right? And start paying attention more. And then from the religious aspect, let's start teaching. And teaching always don't got to be formal. A lot of teaching is informal. Let me emphasize that. A lot of teaching is informal. And what may not be suitable at one time may be suitable at another. So know your times. What may not be suitable at one time may be suitable at another. I'll give you an example. I used to try to get my daughter to read books. It was like pulling teeth. Seriously. I used to try to talk to her. It would be like, like this kid is driving me crazy. Now, she calls me every single day, and she be wanting to rap. And I'm going from junior high, high school to university. And you know what she said to me one day in an informal class? We was driving from her university back home, just me and her. And she said to me something that just registered. She said, Dad, I asked her, give me 1 second. I want to share this point with you. Give me 1 second, please. I want to push Post Fudger Reflections back a little bit. So we're driving, and she said, I don't know if this was real words. I asked her, what have you learned now? Because you've been on your own, doing your own thing. You know, because she comes from a very religious household. So her mother and myself are religious people, saying we ain't the best, but we religious. So she couldn't do what everyone else can do, right? She came in a religious house. You can imagine your father's an imam and your mother's strict in religious practices too. So you can imagine for the kid, that's like, I used to feel sorry for her. Sometimes she would be the only kid in the masjid by herself and with a bunch of old people. But she got to go to the masjid. Other kids go do what they want. But her, you're going to the masjid. So she grew up all her life in the masjid. Maybe that's why she was bucking a lot when she was young. She have to go and just sit around a bunch of old people. Sometimes they were young, but all the time you got to go. Right. So I asked her, you on your own now. You can do what you want. We're not there to watch. We can't. And I think that's why she didn't go to school locally. Pay attention to this, y'all. I was trying to get her to go to school locally for free. I could have facilitated that with ease. You don't have to pay. She's like, nah. I need to go far away. She wanted to experience. Alhamdulillah. You got to do what you got to do. You can't protect them all in their life, right? And she's far away, right? So I asked her on the way back, the last semester or the last year, when the year was over. So I brought her back. And she said, so I asked her, we're just talking, informal teaching. No books, no nothing. We're just kicking it. But lessons. And she's having her experiences. So I asked her, what is the biggest thing you learned this year? You by yourself, you in school, you know. And she said this to me. And I want y'all to think about this. This is our children. That's what she said to me. She said, that's what I learned. I don't know if adulting is a word, but that's what she said. Adulting is difficult. I said, you think so? She said, adulting is difficult. Especially as a Muslim female. Especially as a Muslim, as an individual, as a Black person, as an individual, let's go in stages. As an individual, as a human being, it's difficult, right? As a Black person in America, it's even more difficult. As a Black Muslim, it's even more difficult. As a Muslim, it's difficult. As a Black Muslim, it's more difficult. And as a Black Muslim female, multiply that. Because you can't hide. You know, she's the only one walking around that campus with a hijab on. You know how difficult that is? And I back up. I don't bother her. I let her do her thing. Why? Because she has to learn to navigate in the world she's faced with. That's real. I can't come with my religiosity and just push it down her throat. I can't. She got to navigate that herself. I can advise her. I can help her. But she does a great job. She does a great job. But she got to learn. And you gotta crash sometimes. I don't want you to, but I got to give you the road map to do the best you can. Right? But when she said that to me, I was like, that's deep. Adulting is difficult. Right? So for us as parents, especially Muslim parents, we should take that seriously. Adulting is difficult. And they're going to face that difficulty. Our job is to give them a map on how to face it within the context of their reality. Right? Do you understand my point? To give them the map to face that difficulty in the context of their reality. Right? And then be there as wise elders to just guide them. Because they are the future of this deen. You follow my point? And they're going to face an entirely different world than we're facing today. But they have to take the principles of the deen and apply it to that world. And we have to help them. And one of the things they said yesterday that I think was important is that if we want them to do something, we have to do it ourselves. It was very significant. And that was what the youth were saying. If you want us to do something, you have to be a predecessor in that. You have to show us how that works. You have to show us how it works. And if we be honest with ourselves, we could do a better job at that. If we be honest with ourselves, we could do a better job at that. So I'm running late for the other session. May Allah reward you. Just some things to think about for all of us, inshallah. We could benefit. From what we're talking about. Inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu bikum wa jazakum Allahu khaira wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.